G'day, Mike from Australian Mountain Bike Magazine here. Back in July, Norco released 10 brand new e-mountain bikes to the market. We've got 2 of them here on review, the Sight VLT C2 and also the Fluid FS VLT A1. So we'll jump into all the details. All 10 of the Norco VLT bikes that have just been released share a lot of common products. One of the main ones is the Shimano EP8 motor, but they also share battery compatibility. Norco have done something a little bit different to other brands in the market by selling the bikes without a battery, and you just choose the size that you want when you walk out of the bike shop. So that might be the 540 watt-hour battery, 720 watt-hour battery, or the ones that we've got on our test bikes, which is a whopping 900 watt-hours. That's the biggest currently available on the market, but it does come with a penalty. The 900 watt-hour batteries are over 4.5 kilos, so it does add more weight to the bike. It's a $200 cost increase from the 720 watt-hour batteries, which is again $200 more than the 500 watt-hour batteries. So it's really up to you to choose how you're going to ride your e-bike and therefore get what battery size that you need. Across the 10 bikes in the new Norco VLT lineup, there's 3 distinct ranges. The longest travel, biggest, burliest bike is the Norco Range VLT. So just like the Range without an engine, it's got 180 mils of travel up front and 170 mils in the back. Both wheels are 29 inch and it's long, it's slack and it's big. There are 2 carbon models and 2 alloy models. Next down is the all-mountain Sight range. So there's 4 models in there. There's 2 alloy and 2 carbon. Again, they share the same motor and battery options, but this time you've got 160 mils travel on the fork and 150 in the back. And new for this year is the Fluid FS VLT. So this is the top spec A1 here, and there's also the A2 below. So no carbon options in these ones, just 2 aluminium ones, and you do have a slightly more basic parts spec on there. But we'll go into that when we review this one as well. So the Shimano EP8 motor is at the heart of all the new Norco VLT e-bikes. And what's new with the new motor compared to the E8000 is that it's lighter, it drops a few hundred grams, it's more efficient, so you actually get longer battery life without a change in battery. And it's also got more power. So they've bumped up the torque to 85 Newton meters, which makes a big difference, especially on the steeper climbs that you'll typically be taking an e-mountain bike up. Another important point is how Norco have used the Shimano EP8 motor. What they've done in the frame, so obviously the motor stays down the bottom, they've rotated it counterclockwise to increase the bottom bracket clearance. If you've ridden an e-bike much, you'll know that ground clearance is a really important issue because they are a heavier bike. You do need some extra ground clearance there. So they've rotated it around, still keeps the center of gravity low, but it also means that the battery can now exit out of the bottom of the down tube. It is a whole hollow tube for the down tube, and no matter what size battery that you're running in your Norco VLT, it slides in and out quite easily. Charging is done on the bike with a magnetically opening and closing battery port. It's really easy to get along with. You know if it's closed because the bike won't work if it's not, and there's even a handy tool to help take the battery in and out. Because you can take the batteries out so easily, it is an option that if you need even more range than you can get from a 900 watt-hour battery, you could buy another one and pack it in if you need a really big day out. One of the great things with the Shimano step system with the EP8 is using the eTube app. So you've got easy connectivity and you can go through, check for any firmware updates, or what's really cool is being able to update any of the settings that you want. So if we look at the assistance settings, I can decide how powerful I want the eco mode to be, what the max torque is. Obviously you can't set everything up to 85. You can set your eco up to its maximum there of 70. Put the assist level, the maximum torque, and also the assist start. So that's how quickly it's going to get started for you. So what I've done here, I actually upped the assist start in the trail setting on the Sight VLT because I found even though the settings were the same as the Fluid FS, it didn't feel as punchy. So I'm just trying to replicate the feel between the two. It's a really cool idea because it does mean that you can get this tuning done at home. You don't need to go into the shop to have it connected like you do for some other e-bike systems. So while all the bikes have different end uses and they're also got different price points, a lot of the design principles have stayed the same, and especially in the part spec. All bikes in the range have e-mountain bike rated forks. They have hubs which are rated for e-mountain bike use, specifically with stronger flanges for the extra load on the hubs. They have tyres with heavier duty casings to take the higher weight and higher load on the tyres, and they have 4 piston brakes with big rotors. Additionally, Norco use 165mm cranks across the whole range, and they have wide range 1x group sets with e-mountain bike specific saddles, which are a lot more comfortable when you're climbing in the saddle a lot more. All of the Norco VLT e-bikes come in 4 sizes, and on the larger 2 sizes in the Range and the Sight VLTs, you can even fit 2 water bottles inside the main triangle. But even on the smallest sizes, you can fit 1 full-size water bottle, which is great. If you can run a large battery to be out there for plenty of hours on the trail, you need to be able to carry enough water as well. Each bike in the Norco VLT range has also got an updated suspension layout. So they've moved to a horizontal link, which has also been designed around having pretty low anti-squat. This means that it may not climb as well as your XC bike, but to be honest, after having ridden a couple of them, they climb really well, even without reaching for the lockout switch. The frame design does mean they have allowed for a lot of standover height, but with how they're running the motor, they've really opened up that main triangle for the water bottle storage too. So it's a great design move. Second bike I've been testing from Norco's new e-mountain bike range is the Fluid FS VLT. This lineup's just got 2 bikes in it. Both have the same aluminium frame, just have the A1 spec or the A2. This model sells for $81.99 because we've got the 900 watt-hour battery in there. It's designed for trail riding, but it's actually been a real bit of a surprise package, so we'll go into that a bit more. The 900 watt-hour battery in it, it does put it up at $81.99. Bear in mind, if you drop back a battery size, you'll go to 200 bucks less, and then 200 less down to the 540 watt-hour battery. Doesn't really change anything that the bike does, it's just battery size and overall weight. Which is the cheapest model, comes in at $69.99 with the 540 watt-hour battery. Again, you can get a larger battery size in it. It does step down a fair bit for the part spec though, which I think is probably worth considering for the price that you're paying. Whereas it is the same frame as this one right here. In terms of geometry, again, this is another 29er dual suspension bike. Like I said earlier, all the Norco VLT range have 29-inch wheels. Being designed for trail use as opposed to all mountain or enduro and big mountain, it's got a 65-degree head angle. The reach is a little bit shorter as well, so it's 470mm on the large, and while it's got 2 bid bosses, the Fluid FS can only take 1 cage. The other one's going to be used for an accessory mount if you want. As I mentioned earlier, all the Norco VLT bikes use a 462mm chainstay length. So all of the Fluid FS do the same. It doesn't matter whether you're on a small, medium, large or extra large, it's the same long rear end, which has got benefits. It's a huge benefit for stability at speed. Some may feel that it changes your maneuverability at low speed, and there's an element to that, but thanks to a steep seat angle, in this case 76.2 degrees on the large, you just stay centered in the bike, so your handling of the bike does stay quite good, and that long chainstay length means the rear wheel stays planted and really finds a lot of traction on long, slow climbs and really steep and loose ones too, which is what you really want an e-bike to be delivering. You do want it to help with that traction and power getting up the hills to get to the descents. So one consideration with the Fluid FS is what the bike weighs. Now, a lot of e-bike weight, it kind of blurs into the backgrounds within a small range because you do have a motor to assist you and a battery there. With a full aluminium frame though and a mid-level spec, this one is almost 27 kilos at 26.89, and that was before I put any pedals or spares or a water bottle on. On the trail, it's not too noticeable, but picking it up on over trail features, putting it in the back of the van and moving it around, I certainly did notice the extra weight of the bike. In terms of part spec on the Norco Fluid FS VLT A1, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The group set is a Shimano M6100 Dior group set. 12 speed. So that's with the 10 to 51 cassette and the Hyperglide Plus shifting. If you haven't ridden Shimano's new 12-speed shifting, I'd say go try it and go try shifting under load because it is phenomenal. And that really makes a difference on an e-bike, that it just is a really precise shift even with all the extra power that's coming through. With the Shimano EP8 system in here, like all the new VLT bikes, there is 85 Newton meters of torque there. So it's great having a group set that is specifically designed to take that extra load. Even though Shimano do have Link Glide as their e-bike system, all the 12-speed parts are e-bike compatible, and so far I've found them to have really good life and performance. So Norco have made sure they're not setting their bikes up with poor braking on any of the models, and even on the Fluid FS that's the same. So they've got 4-piston brakes on 203mm rotors. In this case, it's the Shimano MT420 brakes. They have got a fairly basic lever though. I'd recommend running these quite inboard just to keep it 1 to 2 finger braking. But it is, you know, the Fluid FS, it is a cheaper bike in their range, so I can see that they've got a brake which might feel a little bit better for people who don't ride as much, but I think they could have had a higher spec lever for those ones with a little bit more adjustment available. Norco have done a good job with wheels again. What they're not doing on this one compared to the Sight, so they've toned the tyres back a little. You still get 2.4 dissectors as opposed to an Assegai on the front. The bikes can take 2.6 inches, and these are Exo Plus as opposed to the strongest double down casing. I didn't have a problem riding this bike with the Exo Plus sidewalls, but I know some people with how they ride and where they ride would be after more protection or just a more durable casing. That's up to you, and it's a decision you can make at your dealer when you pick your Norco up. The rims are WTB models with a 30mm internal width, so it's got all the support there, and kudos to Norco as well. They ship these bikes with tape to run tubeless, and there's sealant and valves in the box ready to go. So that's a 2 thumbs up from me, because I think all good mountain bikes should come to your bike shop that way. And suspension. It's obviously a big deal with any dual suspension e-bike. You do have a lot more weight going through the bike, and they are getting ridden really hard because you can go for longer. With the Fluid VLT A1, they've got RockShox Deluxe Select on the back, which is fine. It doesn't have a whole lot of adjustment options. It is custom tuned for this bike. You do have rebound adjust. There is no option for any lockout on there, but even though Norco's suspension kinematics on the whole VLT lineup has been tuned with less anti-squat, so they're maybe not the most efficient pedaler, I actually found for pedaling along in the seat, which is what you mostly will do on an e-bike, it climbed really efficiently, and I was very happy with that. The fork is a little bit different. It is an e-mountain bike rated fork. It's a RockShox 35 Silver. I've ridden the 35 series before on a Merida E140, and it was the gold model, which had an air spring, so I could get a little bit more adjustment there. The Silver has a coil spring, and in this case, it's got a medium spring in there, and then I have rebound adjustment, and that's it. So if you need to up the spring rate, you do need to get a different spring kit, and I'll go into that in a little bit of time. So the Ride Aligned app gives you all the same benefits for the Fluid FS as well. So I go down, choose my A1, and try to get my setup started. So bang my height in, and weight and riding gear, gender, and then it punches out what my suggested setup is. So now I just set my rider skill setting. I go with intermediate just because I'm not based on what the suggestions are, it's the best match. I have looked at advanced as well, and for the actual changes that it makes to my bike setup, it's just a little bit more tire pressure. So I kind of ended up playing around there. So I've put that in, and here's my settings. Like, you can screenshot that. It does give you your recommended size as well, which is cool. So it gives me my tire pressure, what bar width to run, the rise, stem spaces, stem length, which is actually shorter. It does come with a 50mm length stem, but this one's suggesting a 40. With the fork setup, so it's the 35 Silver, medium spring rate, rebound, 3 clicks out, and then I've got my shock set up too. So there's less adjustment here than you might get on, say, a top spec Range or Sight, which has got more complex suspension settings. And this is the spring rate with the red medium spring is probably a talking point for later in the bike review. So the Fluid FS VLT, it's new for Norco. They haven't had a Fluid FS e-bike before. And with being 140mm fork travel, 130mm in the back, and a slightly more basic group set build than the other bikes, such as the Sight and the Range, I wasn't sure what to expect. But in reality, I think the Fluid FS VLT is going to do something like the Fluid FS did when it was released a few years ago in the current model. And it's going to punch above its weight. So I was told maybe don't expect too much. This is one of the entry-level bikes, but first few pedal strokes out of the car park, I really liked how the Fluid FS felt. There's a few changes in the geometry that make it feel different when you're getting going, you know, on your first climb out of the car park compared to, say, the Sight that I had also tested. It is a little bit shorter in the cockpit at 470mm, which isn't short by any means, but shorter than the Sight is, and being a slightly shorter travel as well. I just found it felt more agile, and that's even for a bike that weighs 27 kilos once I was getting it going. So it was actually a lot more fun than the Sight on the flatter, gentler trails, which is actually where it should be fitting in, being a shorter travel e-bike. And that kind of played out for a lot of the climbing trails as well, that it is a tiny bit shorter, and I found it a little bit easier to get around the tighter hand-cut trails. Move that into the more flowing trails and machine-built trails, and both bikes rode really well, and you could just sit away and spin away on the pedals, and they would climb amazingly. And again, this is where that longer chainstay comes into a real advantage. On the steeper trails, the looser trails, it just keeps on finding traction because you're not having the wheel tucked underneath you, and so where you sometimes have to shift forward to keep a good balance point. With the steeper seat angle and being centered between the wheels, with the long chainstay, you're very balanced, and the rear wheel just keeps finding traction. And like any bike using the Shimano EP8 system, that torque is really there in low speed pedaling, which is really essential for mountain biking. We're not always climbing at high speed, and especially on steep terrain where you need to keep that traction in check. I could clear loose steep climbs on this bike better than I could on a 10 kilo hardtail. This thing just found traction, and you could motor the top of the climb with plenty of energy left for the descent. And that's a real deciding factor for picking an e-bike. Obviously, the size of an e-bike does have its disadvantages on some climbing trails, and I think you'll find that when there's more features with some height, so rocky ledges or fallen trees, you do need to find a good line to get up and over them. The EP8 motor has been moved in the frame to give you better ground clearance, and better ground clearance than a lot of e-bikes on the market especially, but it still is a lot of bike to get over a larger feature on the trail, and you really will be rewarded for finding a feature ahead of it to boost off and to kind of keep your momentum up and over any trail obstacles that are a bit higher than, especially getting close to knee height. In the same way that the Sight VLT comes alive on steeper terrain, the Fluid FS does the same. I do find that, you know, on the steeper and rougher terrain, you do get reminded that it's not a longer travel bike or with a burlier parts kit, but for a lot of fun flow trails with small drops and steeper sections and straightaways, it's a lot of fun. It's very stable, but still easy enough to maneuver around when you're using the suspension just to load it up and help change direction. Yeah, it's a long bike, but it's got so many advantages when you've already got a bike that's a lot heavier than a regular trail bike anyway, because it plays into the stability that you've got, and you can use your suspension setup, which will likely be a lot firmer than it would be on a bike without a motor and battery, to really help move the bike around the trail. There were some downsides though, and on a lot of trail features, I did find that the RockShox 35 silver fork did let me down. Whether that was bottoming out when you were off a small drop into a corner, which has a lot of load, or just feeling out of its depth too quickly. The main problem with this is that being a coil shock, it's very soft and very supple, which is not a problem at all. Like, that suppleness is nice when you're predominantly in the seat a lot and pedaling, means that finding traction on off-camber corners and on chattery terrain was never an issue. But you can't adjust that without changing the spring kit. So RockShox have the medium spring kit, which is what's stock in this bike, but there's also the extra firm. At the moment, there's no extra firm springs available. We've heard that there is part numbers for them, but as you'd probably be aware, a lot of production is delayed, and that's not just in the bike industry right now. But I think as a rider who's about 75 kilos in my trail gear, I find this fork too soft. And I would get a lot more out of this bike if I was able to put an extra firm spring in there. But as of now, I can't say when that would be possible if you were looking to buy this bike. And that is a drawback if you want to ride this bike to its true potential. On more mellow trails, flow trails, riding fast, it's absolutely fine. But this bike I think has a lot more potential than Norco imagined it might. It's a lot of fun. The rear suspension is fine. You could do a lot of great riding with this. It's just the fork could hold it back if you want to ride to a lot of the rest of the bike's potential. As it is, I had a lot of fun riding this bike. I almost always tested the Fluid FS VLT and the Sight VLT back to back, doing a ride on one and then swapping in the van to the other. And the Fluid FS just felt more agile from the get-go and possibly more fun on more basic trails than the Sight did. The Sight kind of came into its own when there were more aggressive trails, steeper terrain and higher speeds, as you'd expect the longer travel, more capable bike to. But as it is, the Fluid FS has been a surprise package. I do think it's let down by the suspension fork, and I'm hoping those spring kits do become available. From what I've heard, it wouldn't be an expensive upgrade, probably in the region of $100, but I think for heavier riders or more aggressive riders, it's going to make a big difference to what you can do with this bike. I mean, in summary, I think if you could adjust that suspension fork more, you'd have an amazing bike. As it is, at a bit over $8,000 with a 900 watt-hour battery in there, I do wonder if you might be better comparing this to some other e-bikes out on the market. Specifically, the Merida E1 4700 would have an air adjustable fork, similar if not better group set, although it doesn't have that option to put a 900 watt-hour battery in there, and it's not a 29er, so you get a mixed wheel size, which it has its benefits and drawbacks, and that's something for you to decide what you want. So the Fluid FS VLT is a great addition to the Norco e-bike range. I think it really complements what they've got with the Sight and the range. It does actually punch above its weight. Don't be put off that it's slightly shorter travel than the other bikes in the lineup. Having 140 mils travel in the front and 130 in the rear is plenty for a lot of Australia's trail centres. It does come in as a heavy bike with a low to mid-range spec and an aluminium frame, but unless I needed to move the bike over some major trail features, the weight disappears once you've got the assistance from the battery there. It really only plays out when you're putting the bike in your car, or in my case in the back of the van, and physically lifting it around. I think Norco have done a great job with this. I'd like to know what's going to happen in the future for options for the fork spring, because that should really unlock the potential of this bike. I definitely suggest dropping into your Norco dealer to take a closer look at the details on the Norco Fluid FS range, and even chat to them about whether the Fluid FS, Sight or range suits your riding the most.